So the core concept, and this just helps you understand what do I mean by playbook, is what we're trying to do is make it incredibly transparent to teams about what the process is and how they are, what evidence they need to be compliant with it. The second point is, when it comes to, look, these are the things that you need to do, and the how you do it, they are side by side. Now, you may connect to other systems to do it, but the core learning and giving them the confidence to give it a go is side by side. And more recently, we now kind of integrate the platform to e-learning resources so that essentially they're not lost at sea, and you can kind of build that confidence that they have access to the information they need when they need it. I thought we'd put this in, and I think it just kind of explains, well, that's all very good, but why? But like, what's wrong with our traditional way of doing it? And why don't I just go and map all our processes and build loads of process maps, problem solved? So what we wanted to do is just explain the way we see the world and what we see the problem with being the kind of traditional approach that you take. And so the first point is, we totally recognize the value that processes provide clarity. The problem is they don't provide compliance. And even when you have all your standards and all your information written down as a kind of set of knowledge articles, pages, we still detect and still find that there's high drift within how we do stuff. There's a line that says, look, we've written it all down, but how it's done in practice, there is significant drift in delivery between how it's supposed to happen versus how it's actually done. And that's the kind of high drift problem. Now, especially when you're doing complex processes that are all integrated and connected together, typically like program project delivery, it only takes a few of those to break down, and then you kind of create a critical failure event. Now, that can be, something didn't get signed off, our kind of PI, we didn't cover our PI or insurance, or in the worst cases, we haven't put in the right structure and controls in for health and safety, and there's been a hazard. And that's and what we find is most issues that you have, you're constantly firefighting issues created by drift. I do it as kind of a method grid. I'll always call it out and say, this is just a classic drift problem. We try to do something hasn't followed process and procedure, and now we're kind of managing the outcome for doing it. So it's kind of the phrase classic drift. So that's the first point. And the second point, I think this is probably the most impactful, is when we think about the traditional approach, our approach is to place the burden on the individual. We say, look, we've written it all down, it's all there, go and find it. And so it's always on the individual to go and find out how you want them to work. And the problem that it causes is the cognitive load problem. They have to build this picture in their head. I'm sure if you do it now for your own company, you probably, the longer you've been there, the better that picture is. And it's kind of like, oh, right, all of that information is in here, all of that information is over here, it's this SharePoint for that, it's that spreadsheet for this. But that's the kind of, frustratingly, I've had to build that picture of how I think you want me to work and operate. The bigger challenge with that is, well, that's my picture in my head, but someone else has a complete different picture of how they see the world in their head. And some of the kind of frustrations in kind of collaboration is like, guys, I don't know what you're talking about. Where's that? I didn't even know that existed. So that's the kind of traditional approach, is we're very much place the burden on you to go and find out where the information is. And then, do you know what? We'll be angry with the fact that you haven't been compliant with it and haven't followed it. There is another factor in here, which is more about the kind of human, which is, look, humans want to find the path of least resistance to any problem. Like, I kind of used the phrase before, we're incredibly lazy. Like, we will instantly try and find what is the path of least resistance to get something done. And that is a problem. Like, you can't change that kind of behavior. It's wired into us. You kind of have to respond to it. And the challenge that creates is, if I can't find something, and I'm like, I've spent more than 2 minutes, 3 minutes searching around trying to find it, my reaction a frustration will kick in, and do you know what? Oh, I can't find it, but do you know what I'm going to do? I think I have a template over here that I used before. I'm just going to use that. And it's that kind of response that contributes to people not being compliant with ways of working, but also that kind of reinvent the wheel, and you start to feel that everything's inconsistent. So one of the key things you have to kind of design for is the human, and it's kind of like, how can you quickly ensure that they can find the information they need when they need it to basically improve your level of compliance. And then the third point, and we call it the shelfware trap, and it's not the fact that you've spent a long time writing stuff down and then kind of, you know, that kind of, I just feel like it's gathering dust on the shelf. That's not really the kind of main problem we see with the shelfware trap. What we find is the typical response that companies take is, if you have high drift, like we're really not compliant with ways of working, and we have kind of that low compliance, we don't think people, you know, I don't think people are following the process. That those two combined, well, the default response is, oh, well, what we need is we need more checklists, we need more second line, and we need more third line independent assurance. And the challenge that brings is, if you're not careful, you're not really addressing the root cause. Like, we're not helping teams get it right first time, but just trying to improve how transparent we are in what is the process, what are the controls, and how you do it. That normally is very distant and very disconnected, and that kind of leads to, oh, well, we want more checklists, more controls, more approvals. The challenge you're left with, and we kind of phrased it well, is kind of, you become an oil tanker. It's really, as a company, we become really rigid. We don't have much confidence that people get it right, and therefore the imbalance between lines 1, 2, and 3 become much more heavy and much more costly, that become more restrictive, and we need a checklist for X and a checklist for Y. I would say the shift that we're trying to help clients do is you always need a kind of mature approach and a balanced 3 lines of defense, but it's balanced, not that you substitute the failure of one for lines 2 and 3. If that kind of makes sense. I think, and this was a phrase, we do kind of a lot of work with the kind of knowledge management community, and I think the big push they did last year and this year is, and they recognize it as a challenge. Look, we are, when we think about knowledge management, we're really great. We, you know, kind of, as long as we've written it down, we tick a box and say problem solved. I think what the big challenge now is, like, we only generate value from knowledge when it's put into action. And that's the key philosophy that we're trying to take, is, look, how do we take all of your expertise and all your knowledge and translate that in a way that teams can actually follow, adopt it, and use it so that it generates value? Otherwise, again, it's just a piece of, it's a nice looking PDF SharePoint site, but essentially it will just gather dust and not be put into use. Right. Yeah, I'm on time. That's 20 minutes. So yeah, that's 20 minutes just on the kind of shared problem. So now what I want to do is just show you, well, what is this playbook approach that we take with MethodGrid? Probably just talk this story. So the kind of core concept is, like I've explained, we're going to show you how you'd go about, well, first, what does a playbook look like? How do you go about building it? And then, okay, great, I've built it. How do I then actually use it? How would I use it? How would a project team use it? How would I then build confidence that, yeah, that process has been followed and we're assuring that the playbook is being used? And then the kind of final bit of what we found with playbooks is, because they're used in delivery as an asset, A, it helps teams because they get the information they need. But what we also found as a bit of surprise was just how much more feedback we got from teams trying to improve ways of working. Like, not many people get excited about, oh, go and update a new page on SharePoint or Confluence, whatever knowledge static system that you're putting in place. No one really gets excited about that. But if you know that you are going to influence the playbook, which is used for delivery and assurance, and you want to improve that, and you know whatever kind of improvement or suggestion is actually going to benefit teams in use, you're a bit more vested in trying to actually drive improvements into ways of working.